Welcome to the woods. It's cold. Winter has definitely arrived. The air's damp. It's quite still up here. You probably hear the birds in the background. And I want to have a talk about following on really from the last two videos I did. So the last one I did touched on the massive increase in immigration to the UK and how these illegal immigrants were being placed in areas that they've never been placed before, into rural countryside, small villages, small northern towns, hamlets in Wales. Not the usual destination. And I hypothesised that this was really to shut down exits, to ensure that people didn't flee to these areas, which has happened increasingly over the years. The video I did before that, I spoke about the council in Oxford that was implementing the 15-minute zones in the city, and how this was going to be spread out to other cities and towns as well. And I recently watched a video by Bjorns, and in that video he spoke about an EU directive that is going to force people to upgrade their homes in order to fit in with the green agenda, all part of Agenda 2030, and it will be the public that have to fit the bill. Now the UK is not part of the EU, apparently, but don't be fooled and think that we won't be towing the line. Over the last couple of years, several things have happened, all seemingly going in the same direction along WEF guidelines. First of all, for heating your home, they banned coal and said that you couldn't use it. You would have to use a much more expensive smokeless fuel. And that's in place. It's increasingly difficult to buy coal. No one stocks it anymore because they're not allowed to sell it. They then said that you couldn't burn firewood that you'd collected, or that if you bought it from a firewood retailer, someone who sells logs, it would have to be a certain percentage dried wood. Now, in order to reach that percentage, actually costs a lot more money. They need to kiln dry it, they need to store it for longer, and these costs are passed on to the people who have to buy it. So at every turn, things become much more expensive. More expensive for the supplier, more expensive for the consumer. I spoke a couple of years ago about how they're going to get you out of your vehicle, how they're going to stop you owning a car. In 2030, no new diesel or petrol cars will be sold in the UK. That's quite a major step. But no one was that worried. They would continue to drive around in second-hand vehicles. The price of second-hand vehicles has increased over the last 2 years by around 25%. And I spoke to a friend of mine who's still involved in mainstream politics. And he quite simply told me that by 2030, not only will you not be able to buy a new petrol or diesel car, but that petrol and diesel will be out of reach for most people, price-wise. We've seen recently how the price increase in fuel, regardless of where they blamed that on, has hit people hard. In the last budget, what they didn't tell you in the House of Commons, but which is within the budget, is that in March there will be a 23% tax increase on fuel, which will put it over, well over £2 a litre. It's very unlikely that these prices are going to come down, but that they will continue to rise. Those 15-minute cities I spoke about will only allow you to drive within your zone. If you wish to drive outside of that, you can only do it twice a week. Little by little, they will reduce your ability to move around. They will edge you into exactly where they want you to go. And they do this not by diktat, not by telling you can't have a car, which people would be up in arms about. They will tell you you can have a car. Of course you can. But then they'll make petrol £5 a litre, £6 a litre. How are you going to get around when it's £20 a litre? You won't. You can't. They're doing similar things. I spoke about the avian flu debacle. And the reality is what they're trying to do is ensure that smallholders, people who own a few backyard hens, won't be able to do that. They'll bring in more restrictions and make it unviable. They won't tell you that you can't keep them. They'll just make it so that it's impossible for you to keep them. They'll do the same with the car. That EU directive, which is going to force people in Europe to upgrade their house with extra insulation and solar panels and heat source pumps. A terrible way to heat a home. Our government has already started down that road. By 2025, no new homes will have a gas boiler. It will either have to have a heat source pump or some other green heating system. They're very expensive. They're very expensive to run, and they don't heat your home. I've looked into it. I looked into it, maybe getting a ground source heat pump or an air source heat pump, and how that could be done living off grid, and it's nigh on impossible. It means that people will be cold and broke trying to pay for these things. And a lot of people will give up. because it's just too difficult. In his video, Bjorn says that he thinks the direction this is going is that it will become so expensive for people that they won't be able to do it, and their homes will be purchased. They'll have no choice but to sell because they can't afford to do the things they're expected to do. So it'll probably be bought by someone like BlackRock or Vanguard, and maybe even rented back to them, which falls in line with the "you'll own nothing and be happy" line from the WEF. All these things are happening now. In my last video, when I touched on immigration, that too ties in with the whole system. If you read closely the documentation on those 15-minute cities, they are to be equally diverse. So each zone should be equally diverse. And this could well be the reason that these illegal immigrants are being placed in areas they would not normally choose to go. And if you think about it, it's understandable that they wouldn't want areas to be separate and segregated. It may not work in their interest to have a white British area, a Somalian area, a Pakistani area. Differences in those zones could be quite drastic, and that isn't something they'd want people to see. So each area will need to be equally diverse, regardless of your wishes or my wishes, or even the wishes of those immigrants who are now here. This is their plan. This is what they're pushing. You will own nothing because it will be too expensive. And I spoke to someone in a chat who said that they won't be able to force you to use one of these heat pumps, but they can. It's quite simple. In the UK, all they would have to do is change building regulations, which they do regularly, and place in there that homes need to be heated with a ground source or air source heat pump. Now, breaching building regulations is a criminal offence. They could very well say that if your home hasn't got one of these, it's not fit for human habitation. They could serve you a notice. And if you disagree or disobey, again, that's a criminal offence. There does come a time when we need to understand that we're in a war, that there is an enemy, and that sometime soon we need to fight back. Disobedience, non-conformity, building community with like-minded people. Never stop talking to those that don't know. Raise our numbers, push back. At every opportunity, let them know that we've had enough, that it's time to stop. No one voted for this. No one was asked if they wanted this. Don't conform. Drive your car. Keep your chickens. Don't pay the fines. Tell them to fuck off. I'll speak to you later, you lot. Have a good one.